Rabies and germs, welcome to Taking a Stab. My name is McConnaughay, and in this video, I'll be sharing my thoughts on the 2017 horror film, Jigsaw. The Saw series is far from the best as far as quality is concerned. In 2004, James Wan first introduced us to John Kramer with a solidly made, albeit rough around the edges horror film that had a real killer concept. Every year after until 2010, the Saw series received a new installment thereafter. The films were a hit and miss, with more misses than there were hits. The final film, Saw 3D: The Final Chapter, was originally pegged as the conclusion for the series, and for what it's worth, it was arguably the worst and stupidest film of the series. In other words, I myself wasn't really breaking down Lionsgate door in anticipation of the next iteration in the Saw franchise. Regardless of that, with almost $1 billion grossed, it's no surprise that Lionsgate would want to go back into the well and try to bring out a little bit more mileage for the series. Personally, I wanted them to succeed. As I've talked about in earlier videos, the concept featured in the Saw franchise isn't a bad one, but rather it's one that is hastily implemented and overtly convoluted. Heading in, I knew what I wanted out of the new Jigsaw film. I wanted them to go back to the basics and embrace simplicity instead of complication. After all, the Saw franchise's biggest flaw in itself is that it stands in its own way and never fully embraces its strengths. I wanted a copycat killer with no prior connection to Jigsaw whatsoever. I no longer wished to see John Kramer's character at all. I wanted a new killer with his own motives. If you've heard of the film The Collector, the film was originally meant as a Saw prequel. If they would have had someone kidnap victims and do that film, I would have left the theater as a happy camper. But at the same time, I knew I was asking for too much. The box office prospects for the new Jigsaw film are healthy, although the jury is still out on whether or not Jigsaw 2 will be in the cards. As of this writing, the film is at 60 million worldwide, and is pacing behind every other Saw film except for Saw 6, which is effectively the film that led to them merging Saw 7 and Saw 8 into Saw 3D, as opposed to separate films. Regardless though, because of synergy and overseas assistance, Jigsaw is definitely a feather in the series' cap, even if it didn't reignite interest in the series overall. As far as reviews are concerned, no Saw film has ever been received very well, with the first film usually regarded as the best. With that being said, the Rotten Tomato percentage is the third highest of the series, and the cinema score has improved from its predecessors. Jigsaw is directed by Michael and Peter Spierig, otherwise known for their work on Predestination and Daybreakers, neither of which have I seen. The film is written by Josh Stolberg and Peter Goldfinger, and it stars Matt Passmore, Callum Keith Rennie, and Hannah Emily Anderson. As with the rest of the series, Tobin Bale appears in some capacity as well. The film is set a decade after the death of the Jigsaw killer, and happens when a new succession of murders are uncovered that seem suspiciously like the deceased killer's handiwork. But how can that be, everyone asks, because Jigsaw was terminally ill with cancer, and, more importantly, his throat was slit in Saw 3. Unless they're trying to suggest Dr. Lawrence Gordon, who was revealed in Saw the Final Chapter as being in his affiliation, stepped in and tended him before he had the chance to bleed out. But wait, that still wouldn't work because of the autopsy shown in Saw 4. In terms of noticeable improvements, I compliment the film, in some regard, for lessening the amount of quick editing that was featured, something that I'd always disliked about other films in the series. With that said, it still finds its way into the film. I'd also compliment that the film features natural light and discards the dark green tint oftentimes featured in the other films. With all that being said, as a whole, Jigsaw doesn't really provide a whole lot to talk about. If anything, something I'd single out is how not different the film feels from its predecessors, showing that in the 7 years we've waited for the 8th film, they still haven't come up with a new formula for themselves. All of the characters are one-dimensional and generic, with their reason for involvement in the narrative being one-dimensional and generic, their moral predicament being one-dimensional and generic. And the phrase one-dimensional and generic is about how I describe a lot of the films in the Saw franchise. Jigsaw, like many of the other films, hopes its twisty nature can draw enough of a smirk out of you that you forgive it that it doesn't offer a whole lot of new ideas. However, it doesn't succeed. I'd say that the concept of Jigsaw is better in theory than in execution. Everything is par for the course in this film. I would say that it is better than Saw 3D, but if that's really where the goalpost is, then why even bother? I would love it if someone came along and breathed in new life in the Saw franchise, but the someone that will do that was not involved in the making of Jigsaw. Thanks for watching my review, and if you agreed or disagreed, feel free to leave a comment below telling me what you think about the new film.